There we go. Okay, so this is a bunch of sticks or logs that's not bundled together, so there's very little order in it. So I'm relying on and depending on Hadley, Sipo, and Awile to help me bring it together, at least close enough so that it can take, so that it can catch. That's what we're hoping for, or we kind of aspiring toward. In the last session, we picked up with what felt like a leftover. So we like made a summative or an attempt to reflect on where we've come thus far, and then we picked up a leftover piece, which I think had something to do with returning to opposition as a base condition, or opposition as a base condition. The Hadley and Sipo, you brought in elements from the Protagoras. I hadn't yet read it, and I realized afterwards the virtuosity of that recommendation of Ile. Thank you. It was that and Amino are going really well together. So, I mean, Hadley and I were just sharing now this sense of seeing Socrates or reading Socrates in the way that he's relating to Protagoras in that dialogue, and just like noting something like his manner or his method, like the way that he handles him in conversation. There's like something that people can say sometimes is a sense of being almost shamed by Socrates, or feeling ashamed, or like he can have that effect. And there's a very tender way that Socrates seems to deal with Protagoras at the end, when he like gets him into a position, and then Protagoras he concedes something, but Socrates doesn't like lord it over him. There's a tender like letting it go on. So there's like that was most prominent for me in the dialogue, like this the character of Socrates, the way that he was moving through people. So in our context, it might be nice to like reflect on that element of it, like the drama of it, or the process of it. Like last week it was probably coming up in terms of thinking about the process that we have been following very loosely, like orientating towards a virtue, then I'm forgetting the second element, but reflecting on the way in which that virtue is appearing between us. But if there's because we were having coming back to this proposal of sorts of appropriate opposition, and opposition was a leftover last week, this idea of measure and appropriateness, which comes out in this Protagoras, might be a good piece to pick up today, like getting into what is appropriate, or like what is the measuredness, and even in terms of the time. And I might be like in a pure act of self-contradiction here as I go on this like jumbled beginning speech gathering firewood, but like that middle section where Socrates is like, Protagoras, I can't continue with you if you just like go off into these speeches. Like, can you concede to, or can you come to the point where you engage with me in this like back and forth manner, like shortened? And Socrates, he's like, I can't engage in this lengthy speech thing. So then applying that to us, like thinking of uh, measure. How can we think about our measure? Because if there's tangible or tactile things to take away, it might be those very simple like process or creative constraints that afford dialogue taking off. Like that seems to be most of the virtuosity that Socrates is displaying in this dialogue. So then it's thinking about, so what are the creative constraints? How do we constrain or oppose each other so that we afford the emergence of something, or the effective inquiry into? And the last piece of wood would be what Hadley ended us off on last time, which would be the um the being of virtue, or the character of virtue, or the person of virtue. So yeah, um and I was hearing Hadley a little bit more along that, like, what's the ontological status, or the what is the being of virtue? That, and I'm preferring that question more in the line of like the person of virtue. But that's the last log. Um, and so the person of virtue, the one many relationship, and that the so opposition. We have the opposition in terms of that one many relation in virtue. Then we have the measuredness or appropriateness, and then the being of virtue. Can you guys help me make that be something um, worthwhile?
I'm gonna try and hop in. It's not too much of an addition, but maybe something that you maybe left out from the previous conversation that's relevant to this conversation that you're putting forth right now, which is philosophy itself as a virtue-like activity. That's something that we touched upon briefly in the previous session. And we came to the conclusion that philosophy was virtue-like in its ability to foster appropriate opposition in itself being an appropriate opposition. It is the act of appropriately opposing through putting forward arguments and letting, I think the way that I phrased it, what is true be true and what is false be false. So it's that recognition of the true as true and the false as false. In that sense, the Protagoras or the Protagoras, whatever it is profoundly useful in that the Socratic element or the way that Socrates is handling Protagoras is itself a sort of picture or an image of philosophy per excellence. It's an example of how to philosophize because there's several instances in the text where Socrates seems to be sort of he agrees to let Protagoras proceed in the way that Protagoras wants to proceed is one of the examples. So when he begins the argument concerning virtue, he asks Protagoras whether he would rather tell a story about why virtue can be taught or give an argument. Um, and he says that the best way to go about this would be to let Protagoras choose which one that he would prefer to use. And so he goes on, Protagoras goes on then to choose telling a story, and then halfway through, after his story changes into the form of argumentation. And that sort of sets Socrates up on the right foot to start engaging with Protagoras. That prior to opposing him, he begins by sort of letting him have a sort of springboard where he can express himself in the most sort of comfortable way possible before he embarks on that sort of dialectical back and forth where he decides that Protagoras' manner of proceeding actually might not be conducive to the type of thing that he's trying to do. Um, so in that sense, the exemplar that we're getting, or at least the starting point that I'm trying to point to, is that um, there's some sort of a finding a common ground that has
Mm,
to be there, and he navigates
yeah,
that finding a common ground quite well in that
yeah,
instance. So maybe we
um,
could perhaps talk about if we were to talk about the text and this way of approaching it before we get into the being of virtue, perhaps we can explore sort of the steps by which the handling of the argument proceeds. So not so much the argument itself, but what are the what are the steps that Socrates takes in the Protagoras when handling a conversation? So, for example, one would be
yeah.
finding a common ground.
Yeah, that makes me like the word in my mind is tarry, like he tarries with him. Um, so if I were to be like Protagoras, or so to make it personal, this is a gesture to that effect of a common ground seeking it. Like, um, how cool would it be to be Protagoras? Like you esteemed by everyone as being wise. You're a teacher of virtue. Like that's what we've come together around. It's like, can we teach virtue? Um, and then realize like it would be cool to be esteemed as someone who can teach virtue and be able to travel from place to place, giving the what are they called? Provisions of the soul, like this the nutrients of the soul to people. And that's what has the young man that Socrates goes to the dialogue with so excited. He's like he's excited to get his provision, like the food. And it's I read this like the day after the night before. Had a conversation with someone, and if I'm honest and I reflect on myself, like I was probably predominantly in a mode of some kind of sophistry. Like I was like that's the way that I was relating. And there's like a um yeah, there's something that when I then encounter Socrates in the dialogue the next day, I'm like, oh, there's like a bit of like shame around it. But I also have to try and be honest about like that desire to be sophisticated or to like to have that. And like this is what we wrestling because we feel this tension. We want to be able to offer something in the context of virtue, but we it's like if we pursue that philosophically, like it requires us to like ask if it's possible, and then Socrates is our help. But was that yeah? I'm trying to relate to Sipo right now by doing that. I'm not sure if it does.
You guys hear me? I'm still I'm thinking about what Ed just said about the steps. My mind went off a little bit because I'm recalling it's the same steps Socrates brings up in the Meno, but in the Meno he brings the steps up while telling me an appropriate way for friends, an appropriate way for friends to inquire or engage in conversation. Like when he says it would be appropriate for me to speak in a manner in which you are accustomed to call me a friend. And, it just brings up the same thought with Protagoras being given an opportunity to use the manner in which he is accustomed to, which I guess it also brings up the point of somebody using the best argument first, but allowing them to bring forth the best argument and not weakening them from the start. Like, okay, give me your best possible argument for why you believe virtue and why you believe virtue can be taught. And I guess in a way, when your best argument stops making sense, you become more open to listening about it, to the topic you are. Your best possible argument is the number one reason you have for thinking you know something. And then when you realize that the best possible argument doesn't make sense, you're more open to time than starting off on a weaker one, knowing you still believe this. That's just what comes to mind when you think about it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I forgot completely about the friendship aspect and and the correct way to speak to friends. And I think it's particularly relevant when it comes to, again, reflecting on the activity that we're partaking in currently. Like there's something about the way that we converse, all of us as being actually friends in the first place, and then philosophers in the second place. We've sort of been brought together by this peculiar subject that we do. And that's just very particular for our case. But it means that, when we try to express ourselves in these things, we sort of have already preempted a sort of back and forth, or we've already tried to figure out how to skillfully handle each other. And our ability to have those sort of like aha moments that we had on Friday when I pitched that sort of the being a virtue pitch is the result of that sort of skillful relationship with the material that is sort of opposition or um, appropriate opposition. In the specific context, again, of friendship and virtue and those sorts of things being related, it seems like with friendship, there's also an element of that harmonizing or making things be what they are uh, present in friendship. So like for example, you have a friend, right? And when you're first starting out being friends, you're friendly to them just for the sake of being friendly. It's like pleasantries. Um, and the sort of pleasantries are what allow you to find that common ground. So I greet you, I say what's up, I ask how your day is, and I sort of imitate the sort of interestedness in you, and then eventually I become friends with you over a period of time. But after that period of time, when you're acting like an idiot, or when you're making a bad decision, as a good friend, it's my duty not to let you make those bad decisions. It's my job to step in and say, yo, dude, Seapo, you can't keep going out on benders or whatever, Like, I don't know, not something that you do, but there's this element that in my being friends with you, I come to recognize sort of these limitations and these elements where I can trespass and oppose you. Um, and the more that friendship grows, like some of your, in at least in my personal experience, some of my best friends are the people that oppose me the most, almost. Like people that I almost share completely nothing with, who I can just disagree with consistently, and find points, little nuggets of agreement where we get to something complete. And so in that way, sort of the relationship of friendship um, has that ability to sort of bring out, as you were saying, the best in people, which means somehow also being able to spot something bad or their weaknesses. And in the same way that we, in an argument, look for the false knowledge, and then what we do is pass that out as false, we look for the weaknesses in people and sort of pass them out as weaknesses, and the strengths in people and pass them out as strengths. And that requires a certain sort of courage and honesty in the approach. And you can see that to bring it back to the dialogue in the Protagoras, I talked about sort of the first stage being finding a common ground where Socrates allows Protagoras to speak how he speaks. The sort of second stage would be appropriately opposing, or whatever you might call it, because in the middle, where Protagoras starts ranting and going off on these sort of side quests on virtue, I guess if you want to call them that, Socrates is very quick to pull him back and go, no, 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 this isn't actually adding anything to our conversation. You're just running away from the questions, and you're being like Pericles and those other speakers who are ringing out like the bronze bowls before I silence you. Um, there's that ability to like figure out, when to sort of be a force for good, uh, to bring it back to that anger example that we were talking about, to sort of be able to turn someone's soul in the correct way, and predispose them towards something worthy. So if we were to, again, just go through these steps, I don't know why I'm so interested in the sort of practicality of this. It would be to find a common ground and then to appropriately oppose. And that sort of process seems to sort of repeat itself continuously throughout the text. After they talk and after Socrates reprimands Protagoras, there's that moment where they need to come to a new set of terms, where the Socrates is like, I can't keep up with you if you're going to go on these long-winded answers, and you can't keep up with me if we're going to go on these short-winded answers. So we sort of need a mediator, to get us to see eye to eye. And there's that difficulty of the mediator that comes up, that I think is quite interesting.
At that point of the dialogue, the terms become like the explicit subject of the dialogue, which is interesting. Like they're like, okay, what are our terms of engagement actually from here? It was like the first time I read Platonic dialogues like that kind of discussion was always like a little bit interesting and peculiar. So I mean, in terms of where it feels like we are now, like we gathering, and then we in like there's like a personal like we're gathering terms maybe, and there's the personal, and we kind of, it almost feels like we're waiting for because what Socrates does to lessen Protagoras's, maybe like you say, anxiety, is that he's like, Protagoras, I'm not here to shame you or show you up. It's just that like I'm after these things that continually perplex me. So he's like, so he wants to be with Protagoras, and he's like, simply because there's more capacity in us both doing it and like being towards the thing, so that we can like examine what this thing is. I think in that specific instance, it's the one many nature of virtue, or is virtue one, or is it many? And he tries to get Protagoras to be straight about it, to give like, so the not saying we have to go there yet, but if is that somewhere that we can like kind of go into the is virtue one or many? Do you think it will yield? Avila needs to add the or contain us or frame us, or
hectic stuff. Can I say I don't know? And tip my hat and sort of
so this piece of the measure of the appropriate, yes, there, yeah, okay, okay, nice, yeah, this feels like a place that we can go. Tell me if you agree. There's It's this peculiar nature of virtue and not being reducible to any instance of a virtuous act, so that it can flip from its opposite. Like what seems to be courageous, or in this instance, like in terms of the appearance of it, can be the exact opposite. So there's this capacity for what virtue appears to be completely opposite to itself. Then that seems to be the context where we'd reach for a word like measure or appropriateness, because the measure, or the ability to be appropriate, like determines the use, or it doesn't even seem, because that seems like a bit removed. It's like the virtue is in the measuredness. So then, like what are the things that are being, what's being measured? Do you think what's being proportioned?
I would prefer the word appropriateness over measure, because appropriateness would give us an idea of principle to situation fit, which would then give a better upshot of how virtue is showing up in a specific situation. Larry's favorite example of, I don't want to call it virtue, an example he used a lot when we were doing Protagoras is retreating from battle as a courageous act, right? It's completely, it does not seem like courage to retreat, right? But there's a wisdom in exercising courage that makes the retreat courageous, right? So their courage looks like its opposite. It looks like cowardice. To the untrained eye, simply running at something you haven't really thought about. You want to go and wrestle a lion, for example. You haven't really thought about it. You're going in guns. It looks to people to be courageous, right? You could be scared shitless on one side and are doing that because you know it is what is expected from you. Yet to everybody on the outside, it appears courageous because you have all the what people consider courage to be. But if we look at the appropriateness within the situation, the act itself, we can get a better upshot of it. I don't think I've answered your question. I think you were asking, what is being measured? What exactly is being proportioned?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think appropriateness for me does better work than measure. Maybe you can help me.
You brought in that element of the thing that helps determine appropriateness, like that's what I'm taking from what you said, like so what is it? So in an instance where what is courageous appears completely cowardice, what is it that affords the one who is courageous in that manner to choose that action? So like what gives the appropriateness to that act? There's that we've been probing that question a few times in the series of this dialogue, because it moves the question of virtue to that. Yeah, I guess we're asking into that thing, like what is that confers appropriateness? This might be Hadley's being of virtue.
Yeah, it seems like we're pushing towards the being of virtue again. The sort of the virtuosity of the act comes from some virtue or some one virtue that seems to make it an instance of courage or not. And I guess again in the situation of the choice to run away or the choice to hold fast in battle, what I imagine would determine that is something like sound judgment or reason. It seems to be back again at that sort of mother virtue, because if courageousness is something like just holding fast or rushing into battle or something like that, or standing up in the face of fear, the question then becomes sort of what is the correct object of fear, or what is the correct object to rush into, or something like that. And then sort of we have a sort of priority where the determining factor for courageousness actually becomes a sort of wisdom. It sort of becomes a way to navigate yourself in a certain context-specific case. But then the further question comes up: if wisdom is what makes an act courageous. And we're saying that wisdom is in some sense necessary for virtue, or I'm saying that. Am I don't know whether I'm willing to equate virtue itself with wisdom. That is virtue identical to wisdom, or is wisdom just a sort of medium through which virtue passes? I don't know.
Seems 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 it's not so much the same, but but its application seems to bring one close to being virtue. The application of wisdom seems to bring someone close to being virtue. So rather, we seem to perceive someone who applies wisdom as virtue. So it goes back to virtue being there witness. And then Paul, when we identify when we see action. But then the problem which is coming up in my head now we seem to be falling into a realm of creativity. We seem to be falling into a realm of creativity about what is courageous and what is cowardice. And now we're going to fall into the question of who is fit to judge which one is truly which, except the person who truly understands which one is which already. In other words, for the people who say so and so is a coward, have their own reasons for saying so and so is a coward. And they are very different from those who are saying so and so is courageous. For example, suppose somebody is rushing into war, but they have family to take care of, and family is more important than them. Soldiers who on the death of their family. The people who prioritize taking care of their family say, no, he did a courageous thing to turn his back on avoiding one partner in order to take care of his family. But to the people who think the nation, or not the nation which you're fighting for, is what's important for the sustainment of everything in the nation, including the family, we're going to think the person is a coward, is a selfish coward who thought about the survival of their own family. I don't know if I'm making sense to you guys, but it seems it depends on the values of the people who are judging, who will say what was courageous, what was not courageous. But it seems really difficult to say who's in the right without assuming exactly what courage is from the point of the person who's judging, unless they know what truly determines courage.
Isn't that peculiar though? I just want to point to a peculiarity there, just in this example that you've given, which is not so much about how we get to know the true virtue or who has right to know the true virtue, like who is correct in their claims, but rather the peculiarity is that all people make claims about it. So in the case of professional knowledge, and I think this comes out in the Protagoras quite well. When it comes to sort of medical knowledge, the people that have medical knowledge make claims about medical knowledge. And the layman, if the layman were to challenge the person with medical knowledge about the medical knowledge itself, would be sort of laughed out as, being ridiculous because they're not qualified to talk about this. But when it comes to the realm of virtue, it seems like we all reason about virtue. And even if we can't come to some agreement that some action is wise in a certain way, the fact that actions make us exercise our wisdom at all, or that we use wisdom as a sort of measure for virtue, because we are deliberating what's the appropriate or the wise action, the right thing to do, or the correct action to do in the situation, sort of points to peculiarity in virtue, or sets up an even closer relationship to wisdom with virtue than it seems like any other of the knowledges. In a weird way, I want to say, I don't know whether to say knowledge is more virtue-like than anything else, or virtue is more knowledge-like, or virtue is more knowable. I'm not sure how to phrase it. The phrasing is escaping me at the moment, but what I want to say is that because action in general, and especially actions that are supposed to be virtuous in some sense, or supposed not to be virtuous, have this capacity to stimulate wise discussions or to stimulate rationality about it. The two seem to have a sort of close relationship.
Yeah. Actions with one another. Actions like that came out in the beginning of the dialogue. The peculiarity of politics, or of us being together, and that there's an implied measure that we each apply in that, like the act of acting with one another implicates us in a measure, in some sort of measure, or like use of reason, or like we're applying some kind of knowledge, the knowledge of what it means to be together, the knowledge of what it means to act together well. That's what we are applying. And then we like what so Protagoras is that's the knowledge that Protagoras is saying that he's excellent in, or that he is a professional in. He's like, I can make good citizens. I can make people who are good at acting with one another in a citizenry. Which is it's also kind of like a latent desire for us. I would love to solve that. I think, but apparently not. Yeah.
What's interesting though, and that's what he says. That's what he says he can make, but continuously throughout his conversation, he keeps needing to be corrected by Socrates about how the two of them can get along for a common end. Yet he seems to be suggesting he's good at making people get along for a common end. But what's interesting is that he, in his ability to admit fault, he also shows a capacity to be the type of person who can work life for common. His willingness to be corrected, even though he claims he is a know of the thing, when he finds himself to not know the thing, he is willing to be corrected, which is not something we see in all of Plato's dialogue.
He resists and he evades, and it's like at the end, and there's real I'll use the word tenderness or subtlety in Socrates to like not make his defeat so like defeating. Like there's like a feeling of him joining him at the end. Like it wasn't done to shame. But that point that you just made, Sipo, like the like what is that? What is the act of correction? Like we were speaking about process and steps and almost like method. And then like wondering about, because it's not it's both about a subject matter, and the most maybe like the most high definition sense of the subject matter that we can get is virtue one or many, and then really like trying to tease that apart. But then it almost seems like it's almost apart from the fact what the subject matter is. Like the corrective gesture is coming in manifold different ways about how to how Socrates is correcting Protagoras's ability to act together with him. But that involves us in the idea that the way that Socrates is acting together is the way to act together. So then he's virtue, or he's exercising virtue, or
we have to think back to certain claims made by Socrates about virtue. We have to take them with us whenever we speak about it. Even though he doesn't define it, he does point to attributes that belong to it. And one essential attribute which he points is virtue being good, the goodness of virtue. Virtue is a good thing, and we all desire it because it's good. And then when it tries to elaborate on what makes something good, something's good because it does not do any harm. So when he puts it on a spectrum, the highest good is the good that does the least amount of harm, no harm at all. And then obviously the lower goods will be the one who bring harm, and by them being lower, they are less like what goodness is than what goodness is, and what is truly goodness cannot do any harm. So perhaps a good way for us looking at the question of how do we know if someone's action was virtuous or not is to assess the harm it brought towards the person who enacted the action. So if the action inevitably harmed them, then we know it appeared as if it was virtuous, but it wasn't fully virtuous. But then, of course, now we fall into the problem true harm and the appearance of harm. We fall into that because we see that these people we identify as champions of virtue end up getting killed. So, but in all of them, that what's funny about all the people who championed virtue, when they were getting killed, they spoke as if that is not the true harm. That living without virtue is more of a harm than dying. Like dying was a good thing, which is another interest. Because if we think about it, we think of death as the ultimate harm. But where we are, the people we view as most virtuous, or champions of virtue, ending up getting killed for the activity they do, which is pursuit or championing virtue. And still in the death, the champion virtue. I just think it's a truly. Might have thrown us off the initial place.
broke up a bit. I don't know if it's mine today. It's when you're speaking, it made me think of there's a sure. Am I coming through it or?
You're coming through.
Looks like Dan got quickly lost. I'm a hop in here while we wait. So you said that perhaps even though we can't identify the virtue of an action necessarily, we can maybe identify what's not virtuous through the harm that it brings. So we can look at an action and see whether it brings harm to a person, and then through that know that it was not virtuous, right? If I understood. But
that seems
even
to be the suggestion, but we fall into a problem of assumption when we do that.
yeah, but even before we get to the problem of assumption, getting to that that ability to find what harms is it's good in the sense that we come to not partake in some form of harm ourselves. We see the person doing an act that harms them, and we don't harm ourselves. But do we get any? Does it bring us any closer to virtue? It seems like by if virtue is something good, and that which is good never harms, then by identifying that which harms, we see some form, perhaps, of virtue in the fact that it's not in the fact that it's exemplified by those acts which don't harm. But is there what I'm pointing at is virtue or is the good something is the benefit of the good just that it doesn't harm? Is it an absence of harm? Or is there something over and above the absence of harm that is good? So is the good something itself which is beneficial that is not harmful? I don't know. I can't really think of an example. Is it good for itself, or is it just good in virtue of it not harming? I'm just trying to figure that out for myself.
Yeah, I think I'm with you both, even though myself and Avila, I think our connection is a bit jumpy. So this I was thinking about this, like the way there's this tension, or Socrates like he fixes Protagoras, and then as much as he's like, I'm not wanting to shame you, like I'm wanting to examine this thing, he's also bringing Protagoras into examination, like he's examining him. So that's like he's measuring him. He's that's the application. Like Socrates' application to or on Protagoras is a measurement. It's like a so that then if we try to think like what is the standard by which he is measuring him, or how is he measuring him? It's like it's the application of his character on Protagoras' character. Like there's something about the content that they cover, the way that he's fixing him to specific material, but then there's also that more general. There seems to be a difference. Like there's also that more general application of his character to his character, and he's if we're putting virtue in what he's doing, it's that application of measure, like he's measuring him.
Sure. Can we maybe speak more to the character and maybe the correction that's being undergone? So like Protagoras has a particular character at the beginning of the text. Would you say that he still has that character towards the end? So let's start with what that particular character is. Protagoras goes around and he said, wouldn't it be cool to be Protagoras, this guy that claims to know what virtue is and then teach virtue? So Protagoras is claiming to be a sort of teacher of virtue, and he's open about it. He says he's not like the other sophists that hide behind poetry or gymnasium, and they don't even say that they're sophists. He's a step above. He recognizes that he's a sophist. He recognizes that what he's peddling is these teachings of the soul, and what he's claiming to do is make someone a better citizen. But throughout the text, Socrates is the one that's claiming virtue can't be taught. And through the act of this sort of skillful engagement with Protagoras, who is upset, maybe perhaps even not a good friend because the terms and conditions of the conversation have to be changed so much, Protagoras almost comes out a sort of changed man at the end of the text. They go off and they said, we're going to pick up this conversation on virtue again when we have the time. And so like Socrates is in a weird position of claiming that virtue can't be taught and then seemingly sort of bringing about a virtue in Protagoras through this non-teaching method or whatever that he's doing. Whereas sort of Protagoras is the opposite. He's claiming that virtue can be taught, but sort of comes to the conclusion that it can't be through that process of being handleable. So let's dial that in a little bit more. The character that Protagoras is claiming to have doesn't actually match the reality that he is. For if he was a teacher of virtue, we should expect Socrates to have learned something from him, right? Socrates somehow stops Protagoras from harming himself through a sort of misidentification of the nature of himself by letting Protagoras be what he is, someone who isn't really sure if virtue can be taught or not, and someone who perhaps one can imagine Protagoras leaving and maybe not charging this fee, or maybe being more hesitant the next time it comes to teaching someone citizenship. The sort of transformation of Protagoras into what he is the sort of skill that Socrates exercises. And in that sense, again, it's this element of philosophy as letting things be what they are, or this ability of virtue or appropriate opposition as presenting that which is as it is. It's representing reality as reality, and falsehood as falsehood.
Seems to tie back to the pointing out of false knowledge. It's tying back to the pointing out of false knowledge, but it's tying back to the pointing out of false knowledge in the false knowledge of self. The harm that Protagoras, first initial harm that Protagoras seemed to be going, the first initial harm that Protagoras seems to be experiencing is him thinking he is something he is not. And by him thinking he is something he is not, he now acts as something he is not. It goes out into the world and affects others into believing that they are something. And I think it ties back again to the benefit and the harm. To the benefit and the harm. I think the reason there seems to always be a correlation between what is false, what is harmful, or what is good and what is true. Seems to be, whenever we read these diagrams, it seems to be a correlation between those two. If we go back to the question, that presented. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly. I think you said, do we want goodness because it's beneficial, or do we want goodness because it is goodness, because there is value in goodness, being goodness in itself? I think being goodness in itself can still not be taken away from beneficial. I don't think being beneficial, at least the way I understood it, I don't think the point of goodness being beneficial is just an attribute belonging to goodness. And I think goodness and benefit, true benefit, seem to come off as the same thing. They seem to come off almost like the same thing. So in other words, I cannot think of something that is truly good without it being truly beneficial. And I cannot think of anything that is truly bad without it being truly harmful. We just seem like placeholders for words that describe why this is this and why that is that. That makes sense. And I think, sorry, I'm after making that point, I'm slowly losing track of what they are making are the falseness. And I think it ties in well again with the falseness and the truthfulness. I think goodness, there's a relation between this is obvious to us. It's with all things we've all heard it in class before. There seems to be a correlation, an inseparable correlation between the good and the true. The good and the true. Which means, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but it seems to also suggest that there is an obvious connection between the false and the bad. Am I making sense?
Yeah. I think it is. We've said we've been dancing around this relationship between the good and the true, and I guess wisdom and virtue this whole session. I don't know why, but we're having trouble getting a solid landing spot on it for me. So we can say that there's a sort of identity or a sort of accompaniment where the good is always associated with the true, and what is bad is always associated with what's false. But the question, and it's again, I think, trying to bring the question back to sort of what is the being of virtue, is sort of whether goodness is somehow beyond truth, or whether I'm not sure how to phrase this, and I keep running up against my words here. Is what is true good because it's true, or is what is true good because it's true, or is it true because it's good? Like where is there a relationship of priority perhaps between the two? Is there sort of, or are they one or are they many? And if
Yeah.
yeah, and in what
I'm
priority?
saying I'm saying it seems that they're either one or they're either parts that belong to one thing. That makes it. They're either one or they're either parts that belong. They're either inseparable parts that belong to one thing. So whenever this thing is present, we see them with this thing, or they are the same thing. I mean, it's hard to distinguish because of that.
And are they let's take it to the text. Are they are they parts in the sense like how the parts of a face are they each have a different function and are each different in and of themselves, even though they form part of the same unity? Or are they parts of an aggregate, like the parts of gold, and each a part of the bar of gold? I'm not sure why this example, this analogy that Socrates gives in the Protagoras, the part of me part of the text has me wondering whether he never explores that other argument on purpose. Protagoras agrees that the parts of virtue are like the parts of a face very quickly.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think I'll try and find it somewhere in the text. This is not a reading, but it's probably worth it.
No, I see the agreement. I'm just saying I don't know if that's how I would have thought that they are like parts of the face.
Part of me, I just wanna see whether the text can help us, because it feels like we've been dancing around the same point for a little bit. So perhaps
What's interesting to me though, is the way we talk about Socrates' virtue, right?
Mhm.
So we talk as if Socrates is virtuous. And when we ask ourselves why talk as if Socrates is virtuous and look at the things he does. So, for example, we seem to have been focusing on him displaying virtue in a conversation. He's giving appropriate opposition, right? But the question is, okay, why is the opposition he is giving appropriate? And why is it virtuous? Did we just assume him to be in a virtuous role from the beginning because he's Socrates? Or is the end that they reach what makes us realize that the manner in which he took the conversation was virtuous?
The piece that's unique about Socrates' enactment is that he keeps bringing the activity into the shared space. So he's like that's why he wants the short response. So he wants whatever is reached through the speech that is used to be something that is held in common. So then he like pursues is it one or is it many?
So do you see the path he takes seems to be good for the commonality? It seems to be good for the commonality of the conversation. And my question is that why we're saying it's virtue? The way he pursues this is virtuous, because the way he pursues it benefits the conversation of pursuit.
I think maybe to some extent, I think the handling is virtuous in that it's agreeable. It helps the commonality, but the skillfulness of it is, I think, more, to me at least, the skillfulness of it is his ability to sort of enable his opponent to engage sort of in this correct conduct or manner, and that ability to engage brings them to a sort of openness to willingness, or like a willingness to be corrected, or to be correct, when they are correct, and to be corrected when they need to be correct. To keep using the silly phrasing that
So
I'm using.
It seems we are prioritizing the manner in which the inquiry happens. I don't know if you guys are seeing what I'm
seeing. Yeah, but I think
it alone.
No, I think that prioritization comes to the measure of it. So it's like and that's what Socrates is measuring himself against or with. So it's not that. Yeah.
To answer your question about the what is it, like what is the appropriate measure in how did you put it, the appropriate measure of how Socrates? Does somebody remember how Daniel phrased this question? What is the measure in which Socrates? I don't know if I might butcher this, but what is the measure in which Socrates addresses Protagoras that enables us to call it appropriate opposition? Now I'm saying perhaps what enables us to call it appropriate opposition is because it gives this end which we all agree is beneficial, because it is what, how can I say, it is what we try to get in that type of conversation. And somehow the manner in which he acts gets to that type of conversation. He acts appropriate to get the appropriate type of conversation to take place, the type of conversation that allows Protagoras to be corrected.
Yeah. So then I think, like, to put it into enactment, because it's like I would just have like a resistance around a kind of like a like the destination. It's more like bringing it into the material that grants that appropriateness. So I mean, so is virtue one or many? Like, is it? And then coming, like
so come back.
Yeah.
it always contains it back to this is what we are on.
There's an opposition. So it's like it's putting an opposition into the subject of the dialogue, or into the of what we are over opposition. And then there's something about the material itself, or appropriate dealing with opposition, that cultivates a good togetherness, or a togetherness, or an acting together, because then we can come to see by like the reason of the material together. So like so courage. There was that piece about courage not being about being able to go towards what you fear. It's about being able to go towards what you estimate to be good. That's the courageous thing. And then you ask, okay, well, like, isn't there prior estimation required to say what is good, or what is like what's to be sought? So the what is that? Ish. Okay.
Can't find the words.
No, it's yeah. Let me try and say why virtue is perplexing. I'm going to try give an image. It's because it seems to be. I'm going to try to get a sense of the one and the many. So I'm going to try to set up an opposition between us. That it seems or always appears as many, or it can appear to be its opposite. So it can appear as cowardice, but actually be courage.
Daniel from
So there's what?
Okay, now my connection was unstable. Do you mind repeating that?
The appearance can be opposed with the reality. So it can there can be a simultaneity between what appears to be. No, I'm properly fumbling around here. Like I'm in the dark. I'm stunned and like.
Can I swing the conversation into a different topic that might sort of bring
before Headley, just 1 point.
Keep us lost.
No, it's what you're saying is I don't know why, but what you're saying is bringing up the idea of the cave in the part. Bring up the idea of the cave in the part because there's this opposition of wisdom also in the allegory of the cave, where to the people who stayed inside, the guy who went outside looks harm to them, and so he looks foolish because he can't see back inside the cave and his eyes are damaged by the light. But to that guy who went outside, everybody in there, in the cave, look foolish. That almost what you're saying seems to throw me in there. It seems to
there's something about our vulnerability to and with one another, that whatever we do has to be between us. So even if we've glimpsed something, our ability to invoke or to share or commune over that it's like we're vulnerable to one another in our capacity to do that. Like and that's it. Like this is the acting togetherness of virtue. And then so like the
seems that common ground. Because even if we look at the dialogues, we never see Socrates just talking to himself. He's always conversing with somebody, and usually it's somebody who has interest in the topic in some sense, whether the interest is them thinking about the topic or them wanting to know about the topic. And that seems to be an initial common ground, or the common ground of them finding a way to pursue it. Yeah. It seems to be shared interest from the get-go. And then it moves from the shared interest to how are we going to communicate this? How are we going to communicate?
Socrates seems like there's something about him that affords a radical openness, like to every instance. Yeah. And that puts him in service to that quality that I was saying now, that it has to come between us. Because
crazy.
He's not.
Yeah.
So what?
No, like the point you make, I'm saying what is crazy is he seems to hold a position that is sort of like virtue itself, because this type of knowledge which Socrates has, which is, we'll call it knowledge of no knowledge, seems to fit in to all knowledge, all types of knowledge, that when something pitches up, we can engage with that specific thing, because this type of knowledge is this type of. But I see what Hadley was going through with the struggling with words. Because calling it a knowledge of no knowledge isn't really saying what it is, but it's a type of knowledge. It's definitely a type of knowledge. It's not a knowledge of specifics. It's not a knowledge of specifics.
But this is where Hadley's question of the being of virtue comes in. It's where knowledge and being are coming together. So it's a sameness that affords that manifold differentiation and specificity. So Socrates is able to measure himself or measure the other, or examine the other in a specified, particularized manner, but there's something that's applied and something same about him that affords that makes him capable.
It fits into everything.
Let's quickly run on to what I wanted to swing the conversation to, because I think it will help. I'm going to pitch it, and if it throws us very off course, let it be that way. But I feel like we're running around here trying to figure out the one and many relationship, the way in which said a virtue can be said to be one or many, and in what respect. And I want to return to that example of the face, because for some reason, you guys have got me. The more I hear you speak, the more I want to explore the analogy of the gold that Socrates ignores through the series of questions. So in the beginning, he asks, he says to Protagoras, you also said at many points in your speech that justice and temperance and piety and all these things were somehow collectively one thing, virtue. Could you go through these things and be more precise? Is virtue a single thing, with justice and temperance and piety its parts, or the things I have just listed all names for a single entity? This is what still intrigues me. Now, the way we've been conducting this conversation, and the way that Sipo continued after I asked him, was as if virtue is face-like, and that somehow the parts collectively form a whole. So like courage is like the nose and piety is like the ear. They're all different parts of the face, but all together they somehow function as one single entity. In the text, Socrates refutes that argumentation, that line of argumentation, pretty quickly, by showing that it's this very weird and hard argument that I don't really understand, where they need to have, each part has to have a unique difference in order to be what it is. but through their being different from another, they have a sameness, which in turn makes them not different. I don't know how the
Yeah.
argument. I swear to God, I can't figure it out. But he's playing with this sort of like and unlikeness in the parts of a face. But he never follows the line of thinking where it's the parts of virtue are parts as in the parts of gold, where there's no difference except for size between parts or between the parts and the whole. That's the argument that he throws it in there as an option. Protagoras chooses the face argument, and then he quickly shuts the face argument down, and then they get caught on some weird sidewinding topic that never really leads them anywhere. But the more I'm hearing you guys talk about virtue, the more it sounds gold-like to me. There's this sort of thing where, for one example, you guys are talking about appearing opposite. Now, let's take the parts of a face. The parts of a face, just from the visual analogy, never appear to be what they are not. So like an ear doesn't look like not an ear, right? You see an ear, it looks like an ear. And even in the most warped sense, in a mirror or something, or in a house of mirrors, the ear still looks like an ear. So it doesn't act in the same way that justice appears unjust or courage appears as cowardice. There's no mistaking it. But gold is kind of a weird metal. You put it in the light and it shines, and in the dark it's kind of dull. So depending on the setting, gold seems to have this sort of similarity with virtue in that it can appear to be gold or not gold. Okay, so that's one. It's similar and can appear as its opposite, right? Then it also has this other weirdness with virtue, in that the parts it has parts. A bar of gold is composed of pieces of gold, but as soon as we try to distinguish the parts and the whole that is the unity that unites it sort of gets lost. Like as soon as we try to say that courage is the separate thing apart from wisdom, we keep running ourselves against this one thing that makes them all into a single whole. And in that way, it seems to be sort of an aggregate rather than a whole composed of parts. The one many seems to be a one many in an aggregate rather than a whole of composed parts. Then the last thing that's just making me see this gold analogy as this throwaway line as something very worthwhile is you guys are talking about the sort of what makes Socrates's approach to discussion virtuous, or why is Socrates a model for virtue? Well, in the same way, he has this ability to make people open to what they should be open to and close to what they should be close to. So the example that I'm thinking of, we talked about how he can change Protagoras, but he also keeps the parts of Protagoras that are good. So I can't remember what line it is, but he gives Protagoras a ridiculous suggestion about some poem when they're going about it, just to see if Protagoras will contradict himself if he puts enough pressure on him. I can't remember. He gets one of the younger guys in the crowd to agree with him that the definition of hard is equivalent to bad or something like that, and then checks if Protagoras will admit this. And then he says, good, you don't admit it. I actually just was testing you there. And so what he is doing, or what he seems to be doing, is sort of somehow the word testing is used a lot. It's like testing the metal. It's checking the purity of what's going on. And somehow this dialogical process that he's going through is itself a sort of purification. It's a sort of removal of the parts that don't really belong to Protagoras. He gets rid of this false semblance that Protagoras holds onto in his soul, that he is a teacher of virtue and stuff like that. And he lets Protagoras have what he knows, poetry and prose and so on and so forth. He gets him to admit that that's what he has knowledge over, and not knowledge over virtue necessarily. And so in a sense, he sort of gets the best in Protagoras to shine through. this virtuosity is itself this sort of bringing about of the excellence of something else. And more and more, there's so much richness in this weird gold throwaway line that I want to explore, but there's not enough time or space. Not least to say that in the Republic, those who are the philosopher kings are those with gold souls. It seems like there's a lot worth exploring in this one many relationship and what it means to be one many in the sense of an aggregate rather than a sense of a composed whole, because that can tell us something about the nature of what it is to be virtue or the entity that virtue is. Insofar as, yep.
What would be the difference between the aggregates and the composition?
So like the parts of a face, right, is the composition. So that's a composed whole made of separate parts. And the aggregate is also a whole, but in a different way. The parts are not necessarily distinguishable in the same way that the parts of a face are. They don't all have a separate function, but are orientated by being the same kind of thing. So
yeah.
So in the case of like, I don't know, I've never thought about this before.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. I've always thought it's like a face. I want to agree with Protagoras as soon as I hear the assertion, because it's so weird to try and think about how the parts and the whole relate in an aggregate. Like the bar of gold is somehow the bar that is the bar of gold is somehow different from the parts of gold that compose it. Each little piece of gold is itself gold, but it only is gold in the context of that bar of gold. And somehow, even if you separate it from that bar of gold, it remains gold.
Yeah.
It's
so
very...
I don't know if it will be helpful, like if we think about, say, like a silver soul.
I'm not
like
sure. I think it might be more helpful to just stick with the actual composition of an object, like sticking with the gold and sticking with the visual analogies and trying to push those and see where they fall apart. Because so the parts of virtue, right, or virtue itself never seems to sort of to show itself apart from any other virtue. Like wisdom always has this weird thing of popping up with courage, and courage also has this weird thing of popping up where the other virtues are. And perhaps they all seem to show up at once rather than in individual instances. The courageous person is wise at the same time that they are courageous. And they're tempered. Yeah.
Did you say wisdom never shows up apart from another virtue?
I said something more like all the virtues always pop up all together. So like courage doesn't pop up without wisdom. We see the courageous person in their deliberation, and the deliberation makes it courageous or cowardly. But those two same.
So what's sorry, what's the virtue? What's the virtue that pops up when all other virtues pop up? Is that a reasonable question? It's like what's the so it's like what's the gold? What's the
Well, what I'm suggesting is that they all pop up all at once. That the gold is the virtue and virtue is the gold. That courage doesn't show up without wisdom, and wisdom doesn't show up without courage. That justice is not just without being wise, and the courageous person is not just without having some share in other things.
Okay. Are you is the difference between the face and the gold? So for me, if I were to prefer the face, I would say that it's because there's something about say wisdom's a higher virtue, or like the mother virtue. But you seem to be saying something different now with gold, and that like all of them are simultaneous always, or
like let's stick to the analogy. So in the case of wisdom as the mother virtue, perhaps we can say that like wisdom is the head and courage is the nose. and there's always a head where a nose is. So wisdom is always there when courage is there. But in the case of, I don't know, someone losing their nose or something, or someone losing their ear, an ear is not always there. I'm just switching analogies quickly. Let's say courage is an ear, because
Yeah.
it's easier a head without an ear than it is without a nose.
Yeah.
The head always pops up, but the ear is not always there. So we can have wisdom without courage, but we can't have like courage without wisdom in the face
Yeah,
analogy.
that in the face analogy. Yeah, so I think that's my question, because then what does the gold analogy do? Um, because I don't know
It's
if
it's
it
it's
is something I
a,
should.
it's a
Yeah.
quantification almost, right? So like each piece of gold is itself gold, but the quantity can be more or less. And in so being more or less, it is united as an aggregate. So like you can get a big piece of gold and a small piece of gold. And perhaps there are little acts of virtue and large acts of virtue. But these
Um,
acts of virtue are always virtuous in the same way, in the same time, in the same respects as other acts. So in that sense, the parts of the parts of the gold bar are things like justice and wisdom and temperance and piety and all of those. I don't know what the virtues are. All of those things, right?
yeah.
They're never separate. They're actually all the same thing, and we just call them by a different name. Um,
Ah,
because they
okay.
all happen at the same, they're all instantaneous.
Oh, are you saying then the thing that is never apart from virtue is some sort of measure, a
I'm saying
measure of gold, like a measure of gold. The measure is never apart from the.
maybe perhaps, I mean, that's an interesting way to take it, but I was more saying that virtue is measurable because it's the virtues aren't separate. They come to be a quantity together.
Yeah.
So they we can exemplify them to a greater or a smaller extent. We can have a bigger act of virtue or a smaller act of virtue, but whenever there's virtue, all the virtues pitch up at once, so to speak. They're not distinguishable. They're
don't
they're
seem to be
they're
separated.
distinguishable in the sense of like they're like the parts of gold. We can chip away at a bar of gold and say that it's a separate thing, but when we really take into consideration what it is, they're all gold. They all have the same quality that unites them as the sort of thing that they are.
Yeah. I think from hearing you, it's sounding there seems to be a proposal that like the virtue is in the measure, or so you said virtue is measurable,
Sure.
but like the I think the virtue, like the measure is the virtue, because there's something that's like a, I don't know, I feel a bit of resistance to like to the making same of all the virtues.
Oh
The
yeah.
one resistance is that I want to retain a special place for wisdom for some reason, and then I want to have like a mix, or like different metals, like uh like uh like courage is something else, and um so so what's surprising is that the unifying thing, as not being wisdom but as being measure, and
But
then
what's
differentiation. Yeah.
wisdom and like what's the difference between wisdom and measure?
I need to
Yeah.
know what to measure.
Wisdom is
Uh,
itself a sort of measuring. It's a comparison or a testing or a quantifying. It's a seeing whether this holds up. It's a
What is it measuring or quantifying? Like what is it uh
if I can jump in here, James,
yeah.
I think it might help answer. It might help answer Thingy's question, Daniel's question. To answer, go back to Hedley's point. I do see virtue as an aggregate, but not necessarily an aggregate like a face, not necessarily an aggregate like a face. It is closer to the one that is like gold, but I was visualizing, the way I was visualizing was more like water, and then the way we identify it is more like the container we put it in, if that makes sense. If that makes sense. And the particular situation looked like was like a certain container. And since each container requires a certain amount of water, I don't know if I'm even making sense. When we pour the water in the appropriate amount, it takes the perfect shape of that. What's this thing called? That particular container. A particular container. And sometimes, what that container presents most from the water is the appearance of a particular kind of virtue. It's not to say that that's the only thing that's there, but sometimes this container brings that out. It makes us perceive that from the liquid or water more. I don't know if I'm making sense.
I think I'm following you.
Virtue is just one thing, but depending on where you put it, it looks like a particular thing.
I think we want to make it more invisible or less like because then it's something that can still be possessed or acquired or like so we should though we're benefiting greatly from the analogs or the examples, we should then also like remind that they will have a limit. So
yeah, sorry,
yeah.
I wanna push towards having you expand more on your discomfort in the identification of all the virtues as one, because I think the beautiful thing about the analogies is always that they break apart at some point. And I think we've gotten the maximum out of the likeness to gold. Now I think it's time to get to the unlikeness, or to get to the dissimilarity. And perhaps you're furthering that point about breaking away from the visual that we're using will help do that.
I agree, but I also have a feeling that Avile, are you on that same track there?
I might want us to step back into the conversation we're trying to slowly make our way from. Because I have discovered something that I hadn't discovered before in going through the dialogue. I think Hadley drawing us back to the composition and the aggregate, I think was very helpful, because there is something about virtue, right? I'm not making any new discoveries here. I've been restating things that we all know. Something about virtue suggests self-sameness, right? I think in the context of our conversation, something about the way that Socrates remains self-same throughout the dialogue suggests virtue, right? Something about his ability to peel away the seeming that Protagoras presents, right? There is something about it which is demonstrated in the dialogue as kind of a self-sameness, and this is something that Plato sort of echoes even in the it starts with a T, the Timaeus. Right.
I don't
There
want
is
to.
something there, and there is Mhm.
Sorry to interrupt, but that self
There's something there.
that self sameness, because at the end Socrates takes the perspective of the conversation, and then he ridicules himself. He's like, in the beginning you were saying you can't teach virtue, then you said you can teach virtue. Like, so his self sameness contains his contradicting himself. So what is that thing that he's self same with? Like, what is he?
Yeah, I was about to say,
It is, look, Sipo tried to
sorry, Avi, to interrupt. I was about to
look
say
at
there's that weirdness in Socrates's position throughout this text, is that we're all claiming that he's got this self-sameness, but he does have a view that contradicts itself toward the end of the text. He starts out, if we are correct that Protagoras changes towards the end of the text, and we are correct in claiming that Socrates claims that virtue can't be taught, then his teaching of virtue to Protagoras is itself a sort of
Yeah,
self-contradiction. And somehow his somehow Socrates' character manages to stay self-consistent in self-contradiction. And that's the peculiarity, I think, that we are faced with. I think that self-sameness thing, whatever we is fantastic, but it's just
yeah.
it almost it comes together very nicely, and then it falls apart just as quickly almost. It's like a bank of sand.
If we put
I don't think so.
Sure. Expand.
I don't think so. Because I think we know Socrates comes to us as not knowing anything, right? So he presents the power of perplexity. That's it. So he's allowed to contradict himself because he's just trying to tie things down. Right. So I will let you fly free because that's all I'm interested in, is fastening things down. So let's go off in that direction, fastening this down. Right. So he doesn't seem to contradict himself by letting go of what should be let go of and changing his mind, holding on to what should be held on to, be tied down, cannot, right? He doesn't seem to contradict himself. He's not presenting himself to people as an instructor on matter of virtue, teacher of virtue.
sure. Okay. Wow.
That is the peeling away of
that
the self-kiss, chef's kiss. All right.
the I have to. So yeah, in that sense, he's examining and he's fastening down, and that's. So then maybe he's not the paragon of virtue, because he hasn't made that claim. The
My
claim
line
that
is really unstable, so I can't.
It's all good. It's all good. I also missed, yeah, the when you got animated at the end, but the regrettably, but the so he's we might be assuming too much then, because Socrates isn't making a claim about his capacity to teach virtue. The claims he's making is like that he's examining the other, and then he's fastening them down. So then, um apart Protagoras is our example of the one who proclaims to be teaching virtue, but he has things unfastened, or he's using the nutrients, or like the food of the soul. He's making the provisions, but he's in a loose relationship to what he's providing. So that means Socrates has work to do on him. But then is there an open question for a person or a character or a being of virtue? That would be the, yeah.
I think Socrates, I think maybe we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss him as the sort of paragon of virtue. even though he doesn't claim to be teaching. I think Avila's contribution is so valuable in that it shows us in yet another way how Socrates knows himself, and how he has this sort of self-sameness and this sort of self-consistency with himself, in that the Socratic dictum is that he knows he does not know. And in that sense, in that knowing that he does not know, he opens himself up to these conversations and this shift in conversation and the shift in positionality, which appears contradictory from the outside, but when actually evaluated from his own standpoint of a lack of wisdom or of knowing that he doesn't know, turns out to actually be a sort of ultimate self-consistency. It's that weird universality that accommodates for all these different, how he becomes so skillful, how what makes him so skillful is that he's able to relate to a variety of characters throughout a series of dialogues, all on vastly different topics and subjects, while still being himself.
Yeah.
And getting these people to either to for them to be more themselves as well, to get closer to a sort of self-knowledge. But the self-knowledge is not a self-knowledge that knows what it is, but a self-knowledge that knows that it does not know.
It's the that's our question of like what's being applied, or that he is an application, he's a measure, and he measures. So like the what is that, what is the measure that he uses? And even that framing is a little bit off in terms of what you just said, Hadley, because like that makes it like a subject predicate thing, like there's something predicated about him, but there his being applies itself, or applies or measures the other in that manner, that it seems to be able to achieve that vast like differentiation or variation whilst maintaining some kind of consistency, or a consistency, or the
Can we
yeah.
can we quickly interrupt as well, just to point to another peculiarity that seems to be coming up in this session? At the beginning of the session and at the end of last session, we said we were going to inquire into the being of virtue. Have we not sort of gotten to a being of virtue? Have we not in groping around and stumbling, are we not sort of equating Socrates with a sort of virtuous being? Um, in that sense, the character, or in the very literal sense of virtue, is characterized by Plato, and is exemplified through Socrates as this person that can skillfully negotiate and hold on to what should be held on to, and let go of what should
we,
be let go of.
we must bring Avila's tempering of that then in, so
Sure.
like find a balance, because uh, is it, so the tempering is that Socrates is uh uh examining and fastening down, and he's having that effect.
Mhm.
So then is that the whole of the being of virtue? Is that the whole of the character?
Just
Like
the just Is it just the examination part of it? Is that what you're asking? Is the nature of virtue to examine, or is virtue an examination?
yeah, like what's on my mind? Like is it enough? Is that is that is that the being of virtue? Is that ah
He's got this thing, and we've been saying it continuously. Avila, if you want to go first, I'm more than happy.
Off you go, Hadley.
Sure. He's got this thing that the examiner he can't necessarily be equated with the acts that he does. I think to equate Socrates with the examination is to reduce his
Yeah,
character
yeah,
in that thing, because there's this weird beneficiality that he has to the people that he partakes in conversation with. Protagoras
mm,
walks away being closer to what he is. And the sort of, even in the Republic, those two, Adamantus and the other one, they walk away being more steadfast in beliefs that they should hold.
yeah,
And so he has this ability, he has this like ability to steer people away from harm. He almost, it seems like, I'm not sure if I could make this claim because I've never read all the Platonic dialogue, but he has that character of never harming, and so he shares that with goodness, and he
yeah,
has this added benefit in letting people be what they are. He sort of brings them to be more virtuous. They become better people at the end of the day. We one can imagine them being more beneficial or less harmful. In the example of Protagoras as well. I mean, Protagoras is a great example because he Socrates actually seems to sort of predict what type of character he is right at the beginning of the text when he talks about the grocers and how the difference between the grocers and like people with knowledge is that grocers and retailers will try to sell you all their products, but they don't know which products will harm you or hurt you. For that, you need to go to a
yeah,
physician can pick out what's harmful or helpful to you. Um, and in the case of Protagoras, what he seems to be erroneously doing is not so much claiming that he can teach virtue, but shelving off everything as everything that he teaches as virtuous. Whereas at the end of the conversation, we can see that he doesn't actually know his wares that well. He doesn't know which products will harm or benefit the people that he sells them to because he doesn't know what virtue is. Uh,
yeah,
he doesn't know the
yeah,
character of virtue.
yeah,
So there's ways maybe perhaps we could say that Socrates is virtue-like or Socrates is virtuous. Um,
yeah,
and I don't know. I want to push that for me at the moment, just off the reading of this text, I want to push that equivalence as much as I can because I think it's fruitful.
well, getting in like the character, the being of and virtue, like that they're coming together, like that it's that virtue is a person, that like
Yeah.
that's
And,
so
and
so
I'm
so
I'm happy to follow it until it falls apart because I think
the other example that came up for us is Jesus. And the comparison that we made was both have the effect of convicting the one who encounters them towards something negative or false. So like the 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 effect of encountering Socrates is the application of that measure that determines the food for the soul that will be good and not good. And it's like via the fastening, or he like directs you to those places in which you think you know what you don't actually know. And it's not he's not coming because he's applying, like this is where the language is difficult, like he's not applying a measure, like what did you say, like he is measured, or he like, and this is that point, Hadley, that I feel you pressing into, like that, like it's the character that is the application, like the person, the and the result is his, so his 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 application is, yeah, I don't know where that there's like negative or ish,
I
I don't know
think
where that's going. Yeah,
I wanted to stay focused on him being the sort of exemplar or him being virtue. Let's let me state my position as it is. I am claiming that Socrates is virtue. That's the very radical claim that I am making at this point. And I want to try and bring it back to why I would state something as weird and absurd as that. And it's because so he has this ability, he's got a sort of universality to him. There's a sort of one in many-ness that Socrates embodies, in that he manages to pass on sort of this characteristic to other individuals and instantiations, and in that sense is also beneficial to them. They sort of, by being around him, they become better, or they partake in Socrates, or they partake in virtue, whatever you want to call it. And by so partaking, they become more self-same. They sort of become identical to what they are. And in that sense, he's got this sort of universal, this one over many relationship that we've seen in virtue. But he's also got this, he's virtue-like in another sense, in that he appears to be unlike himself at several departures. He claims to be wise. He claims not to be wise, but he appears wise. He claims not to be corrupting the youth, but gets convicted and put to death for corrupting the youth.
Yeah.
There's all these weird examples of him appearing opposite to what he is.
I have to pick up this line before I drop it. Like the so 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 the claim Socrates is virtue. But then what you said immediately after that was in his capacity to make the other virtuous, and that an encounter with him is actually transformative. So then it's Socrates is the teacher of virtue, or Socrates is able to teach virtue. And then one of the empowering things that seems to enable him to do that is that he doesn't know, or he doesn't have it, he doesn't possess it. And that's been this thing that's returned us again and again into the idea that the to look towards what to look at that which his being is towards. So it's that his being, or his person, in its being totally towards something, that has that effect. And then the effect of what I'm saying is it would be to contradict the assertion that he is virtue, and like, or it would be something like he is for virtue, and it's his consistent service of that the thing, or that what I would say is the logos, or the through line, or the intelligibility between us, and his service of that, even to the point where he contradicts himself to serve the unfolding intelligibility between us, that makes us confer or predicate on his character virtue. But the thing that he keeps that pointing towards is the logos, the thing between that
I think I'm making a much more radical claim than you seem to be giving me credit for. I think I'm saying, so you're talking about this non-possession of virtue that we've been speaking of, right? And how, like, no one character necessarily holds it in themselves, or whatever that is. They sort of show you the virtue, they point to something out there. I'm saying that rather than that, the sort of possession, or the type of possession that we can talk about, is the difference between possession as sort of an object that I hold fast to, or that I contain within myself. So something like, I I possess a heart or something. It's a part of me, and so it belongs to me. And nobody, in the sense of virtue, can possess virtue in that way. No one takes virtue for themselves and keeps it to themselves. That's not because virtue is not a thing, or something like that, or that it can't be possessed. But what I was trying to suggest is that Socrates's being is the being of virtue, insofar as virtuosity is an activity. It's it's
yeah
it's not it's not something that he's pointing at, but it's something that he's doing all the time, and that doing is the thing that we're talking about. It's
yeah
it's like
yeah
it's like sort of like, I'm thinking of, I feel like being drawn towards Aristotle's metaphysics. It's like an actuality. It's an ousia, and what it is to be sort of being is like it's like to be like an animal. It's to self-replicate or to produce oneself. And so that being of virtue is sort of a self-production of this activity of being towards oneself and being towards others in this particular way. And so he rather I'm making the very radical claim that he is virtuous, or he is the instantiation of virtue. The being of virtue is Socrates in these texts. Whether that's something that I want to hold on to forever, I don't know. But for now, it seems at least fruitful, because here, for the first time, embodied and alive in front of us, virtue itself seems to have appeared.
Yeah. I think I'm appreciative of the radical nature of the claim, and agree fully that it's very productive. And it is very productive in this. So I think I'm in agreement, and it might just be like a fine, I don't want to say fine tuning, because it might just be like a pinning, like unnecessary but but the I want to like it's I want to press the thing that affords that virtuosity as the doing is some kind of like a dislocation or other orientation, or like a like so like if you frame it the other way, like he's possessed by something, or his being is so radically orientated towards a being that he shines with that virtue. But what makes him shine with that is the being towards which he is orientated. And then but that and then what seems to come up again and again is that being towards which he is orientated is what we commune over. So there's inherent to his activity is the other, is and are others, and it's his pursuit or possession by that thing that can be communed over or through, that draws other people into that same thing, not into his being, but into that being.
Yeah, so he's like a piece of he's not virtue, but he instantiates or exemplifies virtue to a high degree, and by doing so, he sort of he is in a sense like a part of virtue. It's that gold bar again. Like by being such a pure soul, or by purifying his soul, by getting rid of all the inconsistencies that whatever was there, he somehow shines through as a sort of reflection or an imitation of this thing that virtue is, and through that can identify and also purify others and bring them into that shared space. He's able to sort of point them to the being that virtue is. And so my claim that he is virtue is now much softened, because it's not an exact identity. It's an identity through by participation, or some weird way. I'm not sure how to make the identity claim. But yeah,
This is where sorry the that like the because we came again and again to like measure and appropriateness, like there's this proportionality. So then if we put that into the being, that the service of which confers virtue, or the service of which, the good service of which is virtuosity, then it's the intelligibility or the like light of that being in service of which one becomes excellent, or like so like we now like we're so close to each other, but there seems to be difference. like, so it's
There's
yeah,
something about that activity that he is doing. And perhaps that activity can lead us to the being that virtue is, or something like that. And it's that I want to say it's his participation in rationality. Again, I'm not sure whether wisdom is the good or whether the good is something beyond that or whatever, but it seems like his reasoning or his ability to rationally communicate with people is what makes him the type of being that he is, and allows him to act appropriately in each situation, and to sort of to do the right thing in the right time, in the right place, in the right way, to bring it back to that wisdom definition that we had. And so perhaps the being is itself is itself a rationality, or is that, whatever that is, a sort of reason.
yeah. That
Rita, you had something to say.
I'm not sure I'm understanding how being is being used in my mind. Sometimes being is the other interlocutor in a dialogue, and then being as something higher up and holding all knowledge. I don't know. I keep fluctuating between those.
Yeah,
My
so
head
I'm equivocating on the term a lot.
yeah.
Okay.
They're sort of they're sort of being. I think Plato tends to do this a lot as well, but the reason why I'm doing it is because I can't escape it. There's sort of other beings, the interlocutors are themselves beings. They have a sort of existence, and they are. Um, and then
Okay.
there's the sort of being itself, or whatever you want to call it. Being is, and by being, it has a sort of existence. So the two expressions that I seem to be equivocating between is beings, the plural, many singular existing entities, and entityness itself, whatever you might want to call that. And the reason why I'm equivocating on those two terms is that the sense of interlocutors as being is, it seems to have a sort of dependency relationship or a priority relationship to entityness. The beings that Socrates talks to would not be if there was no such thing as being itself, whatever that might mean.
Right.
I think it's a
Right.
difficulty. Whenever we start talking about being, we're going to run up against the difficulty of whether it's said in one or many ways. And I just can't avoid it.
I think I say that because I asked that because I need to be sure first before I say this bit. I want us to sort of take a step back from Socrates with sort of interlocutors, or with sort of interacting with some knowledge, unchanging, unshifting knowledge, or interacting with knowledge or wisdom in person, through person. I want us to move to Socrates as sort of bound to inquiry. That's where the self-sameness for Socrates. The inquiry is what gives him the virtue and the ability to entertain the other as a friend, to draw them in order to fasten and tie down. I think if we see that sort of motion, we'll see something peculiar about self-sameness and virtue. And I say that because even the bad person has virtue. If, like, you are good at being terrible, You are excellent at being terrible. Your virtue is vice.
Yeah.
Am I making sense? Like virtue as in a self-sameness, but an excellence. I think that came up in 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think
When Sip was defining virtue for us very, very broadly, very roundly, like virtue as excellence.
I think the sort of self-sameness that you're pointing to, and maybe I'm using being in that sort of sense, is that the self-sameness that is, or that is exemplified in Socrates is itself a form of being. To be the type of thing, it's Socrates is a peculiar entity. He somehow is himself by doing this peculiar activity that he does. And this activity gives him a sort of self-sameness that the other interlocutors don't necessarily have until they sort of come into contact with him. So let's focus on your example of the bad person. The bad person still possesses some degree of virtue insofar as they are bad, right? Or whatever you want to say. Like they have the capacity to be virtuous. The most immoral person can change and become virtuous, is sort of how I understood that. And so what I'm claiming is peculiar is that in the same way that there seems to be degrees of virtue and the sort of participation in virtue where virtue allows for even the lowest degrees of virtue or its opposite's existence. The existence of virtue is a sort of condition for the possibility of the unjust or unvirtuous act, or whatever you want to call it. So too with being, what's maybe more peculiar is that these people exist at all. Being has the sort of ability to allow beings that aren't themselves, that sort of aren't self-same, to be. And this is a weird peculiarity about being. It allows for becoming. It allows for things to change. And those people that are less being-like, that have less self-sameness, that lack unity, that are disordered, etc., are sort of afforded for by being. And so that in that sense, the virtue, and why my line of thinking that Socrates is virtue, the radical one that I proposed, is that he's the closest, he either is being or is the closest thing to being that we have. He's the most self-same exemplar that we have. And so in a weird way, by being the type of thing that he is, he enables others to be what they are. And so too, that the job of the philosopher seems to let things be what they are.
So then where I've been pressing in there is this. So I want to leave space open for Aristotle's metaphysics and the differentiation of each individual's things being. But I also want to push into the being becoming distinction, and that Socrates' orientation towards being is what exemplifies his manner of becoming, but then we might be liable to a misattribution when we then confer a self-sameness to him, because he keeps pointing us towards that self-sameness that is between us, that we all participate in, that is unchanging being itself, and like that's the continued gesture of him. So then there's a question of how dependent is Socrates becoming on others, so like on the polis, or on other, on others, and then is there a something to be communed through that is not dependent on the city, because the last bit's a bit unclear, but it's coming out that at that beginning of thinking about like whatever we be considering is in some way a unique human thing. But then like is there something else? Can we say something about something else? The last bit was not clear, but
I think there is one worthwhile, like very, very worthwhile and very simple objection to the position that I've been taking. And it perhaps tells us and maybe leads, maybe a nice through line into the position you want to take. And it's that Socrates dies at the end of the apology. But people don't seem to I assume people don't stop to talk about virtue. People don't stop to evaluate the good as good or the honorable as honorable. I mean, even Socrates is dead today, and we continue to evaluate actions in terms of their virtue. And so if what I was saying earlier was true, then that wouldn't be the case. So that's the
yeah.
refutation.
Yeah. Mm.
But in seeing that, there's I don't know where to go from it. And it's sort of it reminds me or wants me to go to the Phaedo. I just feel like this is us just suggesting different texts all the time. Um, because that's the text where he eventually does decide to die, and he talks about the afterlife and um the sort of the immortality of the soul, and perhaps the immortality of the soul and that weird self-sameness and the unity and all of that stuff that we've been pointing to, all the difficult stuff, and the sort of mirror image or the analog of the soul that we find in the Republic, in the Soul and the City, is itself perhaps a way to get closer to that weird being that is virtue, whatever that might be. It's a difficult approachability. It seems like every time we make some headway, we turn ourselves back over.
The it's so if like the language of self-emptying as being the manner of becoming, so then like so the recollection to become recollected, or to recollect, it's almost like the one that thought that they were recollecting themselves perfects recollection by realizing that there wasn't anything to, or that like the recollection is the reabsorption into the thing that is self-same and remains self-same.
Your
So to me,
Eastern are showing up, dude. I don't know. I'm sure there's affinities between the Greeks and the sort of Eastern sort of Brahmin Atman sort of vibe, but it seems like that's sort of what you're suggesting, a sort of like nirvana state where you recollect that you're part of something that never was, and then you just become unified with this thing that never is.
or completely is, or is the um is the, like, because you brought in death, so it's like it's so the Christian stance is that death is conquerable. You can, and you conquer death through Christ, through having the work of the cross applied to you, and that is coming into the light of the world. So that which shines in the world. So it's this like it's the self-emptying into the reality of the world, like into the light of the world. But then like what's what's to be said of the thing that was prior to the coming into the light of the world? Like, was there anything?
Or what's perhaps even more pressing is what's to be said of that shedding? What is shed if it's not part of the light of the world? Like what's the leftover, and how is it left over from this thing that is light? I mean, that's itself its own peculiar and difficult thing to tackle. Like if recollection and this proper knowledge that you're proposing is sort of knowing that you are always part of this thing that is, and you are not really because you're becoming, you're susceptible to change and death, then what's that other stuff?
The okay, so that this might be where the because I don't know if I want to like hold too fast to the framing that you just gave, because it's like um
Can I
it
give
might
you
like yeah
just a useful quick Fido detour? Philosophy is in some circles said to be the art of dying and staying dead.
yeah
Yeah.
As an aside, something like
yeah,
me.
but then but this is the thing that we've been circling around. It's because like dying and staying dead then makes us talk about you 2,000 years later, saying like that person had the most virtue. Socrates was this, like he was, but his whole character's the positioning or orientation was like outside of itself. It was a, and then he shines the most to us like through time. I mean, like oh, yeah,
Yeah, he's sort of an exemplar of being by not being bound
not
to.
you,
Yeah, it's very strange. I don't know.
but yeah.
Avila, go. You wanna say something?
I'm struggling with something in my head. I don't think it's very wise to express. Here goes. Maybe what helps with the Christian picture is not a shedding and a leaving behind, but a transformation. So Paul expresses it best when he says that when we have our heavenly bodies on the outside of us, when we have our heavenly bodies, right, God's not just going to unzip you. Sweet.
Yeah.
And then you have something new. You are slowly transformed into what will be. My favorite example is that Christ has kept his body. What the thing with the crown of thorns was, you can tell that there is Jesus, right? There is there's a transfiguration that happens in your transformation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less an unzipping and more slow change over time, right? I want to bring that to Socrates, but I'm not quite
I
sure.
wanna discuss you on that point because I feel like I don't know why, but I feel like this death talk is important, and this talk
Yeah.
about this stuff is important, regardless of whether it's a change of kind. So what you seem to be saying is that I was implying it's a change of kind, that we just transform from one thing to another in like the click of a finger or something like that, whereas you seem to be saying that it's a change of degree. We transform, or we are absorbed into being, or we be more fully once we are absorbed into this light.
Let's include the word birth.
Yeah.
Like you can be birthed into.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so I can agree with all of that. What's what's difficult is that non-being. Is that being seems to include within itself a sort of non-being, or a sort of nothing. There's the sort of there's the sort of nothingness that creeps into the picture whenever it's the shedding of the body. When I talked about what's that stuff, perhaps you want to say that the matter is transformed or transfigured into what it was always supposed to be. But what's the matter? And why is it separate from the being? And in what way, if it is separate from the being, in what way is the many separate from the one that is all?
Slowly, that last little bit.
The,
In what
the,
way is it separate from?
how is the many separate from the one that is all? The sort of the being, whatever that is, if it's in Christianity being Christ or the divine being or something like that, and we are absorbed and taken up or birthed into this being, then this like change of planes, or whatever, seems to imply like lower order existence and higher order existence, or whatever you want to call it. Perhaps in degrees, perhaps there's degrees and they shift whenever they shift, I don't know. Or perhaps there's a distinction in kind. It doesn't matter. At the very bottom, the top stuff, the intelligible stuff is intelligible. It's a oneness, it's a being, it has this attribute. The bottom stuff, the lowest order, the almost non-entities, the stuff that the rest of the soul, I guess, is what's transfigured or passes through into this rebirth. But the body passes on behind and becomes part of this weird matter. What's that? And what's the relationship between that and the thing that is?
I want to say that the body is redeemed because there is a resurrection of the dead, right? The great people come out of their graves to join Christ in the sky, right? There's something interesting that happens to the body that is left behind when judgment happens, right? There is a resurrection of the dead. There is something that happens to the physical stuff when the soul is redeemed. There's these two things. Even when judgment day comes, everybody must stand and face their judgment. They are called up all, right? And I don't know how to.
So the nothing is not is
Yeah.
I don't. The nothing is a weird. I can't.
It's difficult. As
to.
soon as we say that the nothing is not as well, we're ascribing a sort of being to it. It's difficult to say. Like perhaps we should just say nothing, and then just stop.
I think
perhaps it'd be more precise to say nothingness isn't.
It's it's almost like nothingness realizes itself as nothingness by becoming not itself. So it's like that's where this like coming to be stuff can almost be like a bit terrifying, because you can come to be, you can live, but never come to be.
Yeah. Like that's the not realizing.
In the spiritual sense, is that the implication? Sorry, in the spiritual sense, is that the second sense you're using?
We could say.
I want to say that it's in any sense almost.
Yeah.
Like spiritual sense is one aspect that might not come to be, but there's like, I don't know, there's perhaps a physical sense that never comes to be, or a rational sense that never comes to be. We somehow have the ability to become or to fully actualize our potential to be what we are, but if we don't do that, then we in some sense are not.
Yeah, there's this image. It's just an image, or like yeah, that's the best that I can do for it. It's like that the potential to become or to be is a unique potential, and for every individual that might be. So So the being that is possibly attained or come into is I'm trying to get like the Platonic and the Aristotelian together. So that Sipo's got the night shift tomorrow.
Understandable, Sipo.
Yeah.
Thank you
Rest
for being.
well. Thank you for being
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
The,
I'm not
the
sure. The difficulty is I'm not sure that the Platonic and the Aristotelian fit. I always want to say that they do because I think that Aristotle's trying to work out some of the Platonic things, but Aristotle seems to Plato is good at getting the one many, so like
Yeah.
the all be related to them in this unique individual world. Aristotle's good at getting like individuals to be what they are. Um, and to have that sort of individuality. But in doing that, the cost that he seems to the cost, right, I'm analytic philosophizing myself. The part that he seems to give up is the wholeness,
Yeah.
so to speak. We've got all these individuals, but how do they relate to one another? Whereas Plato's got the opposite problem. We've got all these individuals that are one thing.
Yeah.
It's difficulty. It's again, we're running up against the same difficulty that we seem to clash heads on at all points, which is the one many issue. Um, like this is just another version of the one and many problem. Is all one, or if they are not all one, are they many? And if they're many, in what way can they said to be related to each other? Like, what's the relationship between the one and many?
It's one many.
Yeah, the one many I don't know, and I don't really have, and I'm not sure if we're getting too sidetracked as well, in this issue, or if it's pertinent in some way to the nature of, because we
I,
seem to be equating or creating this sort of identity between virtue, goodness, being. All of these like these things seem to have a sort of self-identity, and this sort of self-identity makes it difficult as soon as we try to talk about them as apart from one another.
yeah, I mean, if we just reflect, like we came onto material that is shining between us in a manner that we are sharing in like in a distinct way. Like there's something to that. The Yeah, I'm not sure where from here besides just like preference. I'm thinking of different like statements of the Trinity or that kind of expression of the way that one many thing expresses itself. I don't know, more like elegant. Yeah, then there's still this image of this sense of it's like there's something there's something undetermined or not closed in terms of reality. So there's like something generative. There's something necessarily that could be, and that's exciting in terms of the the potential for each being to for for becoming to be delivered into being for whoever would be or for
Yeah, I mean, it's also it's relative to what you were saying about it's this opposition as the base condition. Uh, Opposition is itself like indefinite. It's an opposition to what? It's
yeah
and
yeah
opposition. It's something like that has it can be something, but it turns out not to be. And it's this that we keep running up against, but perhaps we're running up against it because it's nothing,
The
nothingness coming into the conversation.
it's the beginning made me think of if it's base condition, then the question is how to be in relationship with it, like the manner, how to measure it, how to proportion opposition properly,
Yeah.
like
But
yeah.
but if you want to investigate the opposition itself, the weirdness is that the relationship seems to bring the opposition into being. And then if it's handled correctly or skillfully, it's taken away from being. It is not. It's realized as nothing. So like we've got this weird opposite. We've got this thing to be opposed to. But in order for us to be opposed to it and to be correctly opposed to it, it has to not be what it appears to be. And it comes into appearing through us rather than itself.
Wait. The is there a difference between um being opposed to something and then there being opposition?
I think I'm trying to talk about, and it's necessarily going to fail. I'm trying to talk about the being of opposition.
The being of opposition.
Yeah. So what it is to be that element that we oppose or something. Like what that like because in the context of appropriate opposition, right? We appropriately oppose something when we expose false knowledge as false knowledge, or we show that something that claims to be what it is in fact not what it claims to be. But in doing that, we're sort of exposing a nothingness. We're
Yeah.
showing this. It's like a magician pulling pulling the rug from under one's feet or something. Um, like we pulled with the Scooby-Doo gang and we pulled the mask off and there was nothing there to begin with.
Yeah.
And when we identify that as soon as we pull the mask off and there's nothing and that we're correct in saying nothing, then the perplexity returns. How does this nothing that is come into being? Like what gives this nothingness its being? And what I was trying to suggest is that we bring, or the opposition exists, we bring the opposition into being by relating to it in a certain way. But that means that we have to be able to relate to that thing or appear to relate to it.
Appear to relate to nothing. Yeah,
Like
because that nothing appears.
Yeah, nothing appears to be, but in fact is not. Like I don't know how to characterize it. Like the gold appears to be dull, but is in fact not. So too, if nothing was a sort of object or a being, it would appear to
Yeah.
be, but what it actually is not.
Yeah,
See,
we in this. Yeah.
I've been again, this is just texts that I've probably wanted to read and are coming up. I've been wanting to read the Parmenides for a very long
Mm.
time, but I've never had the courage to tackle it. But I think it's got Plato's treatment of nothing in
We in
it.
that territory, yeah. Yeah. So
Um,
like all the hypostases of the
and
relation of being and non-being.
I don't know, perhaps investigate it because I think Protagoras was incredibly fruitful. I think we've gotten a lot out of Protagoras. I'm sure there's more. There's always going to be more. But I think for the sake of our conversation on the being of virtue, we've gotten a hell of a lot out of it.
Yeah.
We've gotten that virtue is a sort of aggregate. We've gotten that there's a sort of instance of virtue that is like virtue in that he appears to be different to other people at different times, but has a sort of self-sameness. We've gotten that it's a sort of skillful letting be what is and not and a sort of letting what is be and what is not be, whatever you want to call that. So I think perhaps even though it was a brief treatment of the Protagoras, perhaps the Parmenides will be a sort of point of divergence for this nothingness that seems to keep coming up. The leftover bit, as you called it last time.
Lizzie?
It might be it might be quite silly. I am very resistant to the idea of the nothing. Right? I'm very, very resistant. The seeming for me would take the place of nothing, because seeming is something, but it is not that which it purports to be. Right. So there is something there. So to make something that has seeming and nothing is not, there's something there. It's just not what it says. But it's not a nothing. It is a something. And that's where I think the opposition is
Hmm,
sort of picked in my book. Right. So
sure.
I'm very resistant.
I think it's important to be resistant to the idea of nothing, but I think the fact that nothing has appeared at all is itself the reason for exploring it. It's we've sort of
Mm.
bumped up against it. Even the appearance in the very absurd way that to be that it is what it is not what it appears to be. That is not. Insofar as it is just it is as much as it is not. And that notness that it has, if we want to call it that, that's the nothing.
Yeah. That's where it gets tricky to 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 say it has not. So to give it nothingness as something. We're
Yeah.
like it's because any somethingness that something has is attributable to something that is.
Mhm.
So then in that aporetic moment, that whatever was conferring a degree of somethingness is revealed or taken away, and then nothing is revealed, or there's nothing there because the somethingness that was is removed.
Yeah.
It's
When I said
The
nothing isn't.
somethingness that was there is removed and nothing is revealed.
Yeah. It's
To
as in like there's
me,
nothing.
it's
very
the
resistant.
it's
Because
the it's
my
the
brain wants to
taking.
say the nothing is the something else.
Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know if we can talk about pure nothingness or whatever we want to call that, but it's that taking off the cloak and the vacuities there. It's like there's a towel in your room or something and it has a peculiar shape and you're a kid and you're scared because you think it might be like an evil being or something and you pull the towel up and there was nothing there all along. And so too with the appearance or the semblance. We see something and we think it's something else, but as soon as we pull it off, nothing it reveals that it was nothing all along. And to do
Yeah,
that, the nothingness, not there's a sort of there's a space for nothingness, whatever that might mean. I don't
yeah.
I don't know. And the reason why I'm pushed towards the Parmenides, maybe it's greed of you there. Maybe I'm just greedy. Um, is because I don't know how to speak about nothing. And it seems to be interrupting our speaking about being or virtue.
Yeah.
We keep running up against nothing.
So as far as um I haven't read the Parmenides. As far as I know, there's a there's uh there's like a series of hypotheses given about the way in which being and non-being can relate to each other. I think they're like eight. They're eight hypotheses.
Okay.
I think
Then
I think that's like a general structure.
And
which is
throughout, do you know whether any of these are accepted or are they all rejected? Or we ended do we end in aporia again?
about 1 and 0, about being and non-being, about what
Yeah,
they're
whatever we choose to call it.
I don't know what conclusion could possibly be made about that.
Perhaps no conclusion's the only correct one.
But what was appealing at some stage about it was that there's like a there's a structure to possible relations, or there's like a we're probably too far away from it to be speaking productively.
But I do think that this exploration, I know Avi is resistant to it, and maybe I'm too drawn towards it. Maybe I'm just a bit of a selfish one.
Look, that's a good reason to throw my feet in.
It's just that when Daniel mentioned the opposition as the base condition for appropriate opposition, it's this indefiniteness, this potentiality to be opposed, or whatever, that it keeps popping up in these conversations. But every time we get close to it, or every time we seem to hit against it, we're at a loss for words. And even though the result may be that we aren't able to describe it, perhaps it's indescribable, perhaps it is not. I don't know which one I want to fall on. I think it will be. I don't know the Parmenides. I have an urge that says it will be useful to the conversation that you guys are interested in.
Yeah, there's something about the opposition, how we related to it, like is the claim that it's like structural, it's embedded, so it's not that we are, so there's the subject and then the subject opposed to something or in relationship. That seems to be the one view. And then the other thing is that there's things that are opposed or in opposition, and then there's the relation to the fact of opposition. That seems to be more of the thing. But sure, maybe we be heading towards a wrapping up. I don't know how you guys are doing, but what I just said was pretty useless.
Yeah, so even in just what you said, just maybe to close with this, why I am struggling. Just as the last time we closed, I said we need to get closer to the being of virtue. Virtue is, the isness that virtue exemplifies. So too in the act of relating to, or the opposition, it seems like the thing that is opposed is not, or rather perhaps that in order for opposition to be, there is a non-being presupposed.
Yeah. I'm not seeing too much. I'm not seeing.
Okay, I can't win them all.
Oh, it's the one opposition where that would be the case would be the opposition between being and non-being. But then other oppositions like one and many, there's the nothingness or non-being doesn't seem to be necessarily constitutive of opposition. That's the part I don't think I'm getting back with it.
I'm not sure how to bring it out, but the nothingness seems to be a part of the manyness. The unity and diversity, the oneness doesn't necessarily see the oneness is just a oneness by itself, I would imagine. and needs no need to diversify itself unless there is a sort of absence of oneness. The unity that it is as opposed to something that is not a unity or is a multiplicity. And in being multiple is not, in a sense, one.
Or intermingled within the multiplicity are mirages.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how to
there's
word
some kind of weird going there. Many.
I think there's a I think there's a like a skill or like a because if we take nothingness as in the sense of no thingness, so like a not objective quality, but still something there, maybe it's like something subjective, or then the way in which we subjective or contextual, like the thing that one is in or the being that one is in, and then that gets that is like the pragmatic context of relationship, but it isn't a thing, but it gives the context for relationship. So it's the space in which, and in even space that gets close, but it's like space is the most minimally something thing that is the most thing that so but that so the language that we use to try and convey that in which we are, there's like a I think there's something similar in terms of like a skill and procedure, and in terms of having those signifiers, like nothingness signifiers or context signifiers. Uh, the thing that, and this ties in with our beginning, I think, is that there's like a being or a character to that pragmatic context in which relationship is afforded. So that it's like a there seems to be a person to that. Yeah. I've exhausted all my possibilities. Nah, I think I still have a little bit left over. But sure.
Yeah.
But this is the area. Sure. I'm really feeling complete.
I've had quite a full plate of ideas to munch on, yes. Still digesting.
I feel like I need to be quiet for a long time after that.
Quite a few thought that we'd stop talking and then the session would end in nothingness. Thought that would be quite a coincidence.
It's possible.
But
It's
something
possible.
keeps rearing its ugly head. Yeah. I also feel like I feel like I could keep running around in circles, but it's just not gonna be productive necessarily. Like the the talk today has felt it felt like quite staggered and slow, and then it sort of like climbed up towards a peak. I think where the energy sort of like you could see that there was like a palpable, like the ideas were coming to being, and now
Yeah.
since we've turned our direction, since we've turned our gaze towards nothing, it's almost as if they've left. as if they're like we're staring at the void and there's nothing to be seen. So as soon as we start, trying to get back to it seems like nothing has caught our gaze, and
Yeah.
and as soon as we keep trying to turn our heads around back to get to something, we keep getting pulled back towards this ugly vision in front of us.
That's a nice framing. Yeah. It's a cool place to be. The the
It's
yeah,
kind of scary.
it's curious because there's a lot of labor in this. Like we come together and then we have to generate it between us, and it can be like staggered, and then we trying to, so it's like the reason I've been sharing it is I feel there's value in that. You're reading like a dialogue, and you realize like, oh, I don't know what I just read. Like, and it's not because of a lapse in attention. It's because the the piece of text is just like it's hard to attend to because it's not being consistent with itself in some way. And that's where like Socrates was like, Protagoras, I can't follow you if you just go off in a million directions. Like, so the because we've been so puzzled about virtue and its possession and whether we can teach it, the pragmatic thing keeps coming to be those constraints, those creative constraints or conditions that afford and make possible. So it's like the context setting. But then there's always like you have to the we have to labor together like into and it's like I don't know. I keep trying to gesture towards the fact that that stuff is like the valuable stuff, that laboring together, but it's like it's not really um yeah, I just because it's recorded, like there's just I just imagine like who's following. Is there
I
a
don't know.
benefit of
I think there is like I think there is a distinctive value in this. No problem, Rita. I think there is a value in this, and I think it's like, I mean, even I rewatched the session the other day that we did, probably just to hear myself speak or something like that. I don't know. But it was interesting, and like part of me was like, oh, these thoughts are the words that come out of my mouth.
yeah,
And that in itself was valuable to me.
yeah.
Um,
It's
for
like
just
reading your writing.
yeah, for trying to better my thinking and trying to better what I articulate. And when I watch this version, I'll be just as like upset and sad because I changed positions like the wind, and a whole bunch of stuff that's like wrong and bad, but it's beautiful to have it preserved. And
Yeah, yeah,
so too, I think that there's extra value in this because philosophy is something that happens in like these dialogues and this like
yeah,
this logical process. There's moments where you can see the ideas are mounting. Like there's
yeah,
like the build up. It's like the pace is getting faster, and it's like we come to a point and like we get there. And occasionally, like I mean, I've only been here for the past two sessions and I've only watched the previous one. But I imagine in the past seven sessions, there's like all these like
yeah,
mountaintops where someone's like
yeah,
pointing over there at the beginning of the session, and then like at some point you guys actually reach the there that they're pointing to.
yeah,
Crazy,
yeah,
like at all.
yeah,
Apologies for this. But like I think in a if anybody follows it, that there will be value for them too, because just like how I think we are clearly philosophers that are in line with a sort of Platonic idea. And the reason that you can see that is because we're interested in this dialogical element of philosophizing.
Yeah.
We're open to this like shifting and changing that is the identifying of things that are and are not. And occasionally we seem to be, or at least even the past two times, we seem to be ending in aporia. We seem to be ending in this
Yeah.
like we this whole time we thought that we knew, and we deepen what we thought we
Yeah.
knew. But at the end it's this giving up of we don't know actually.
Yeah.
And it's this recognition of that which we don't know that is the sort of starting point for something new. And
Yeah.
even though that may not have like a quantifiable or a tangible benefit, perhaps the benefit is similar to the benefit that we were talking about in the Protagoras idea.
Mm.
Protagoras and Socrates don't answer the question of the relationship of virtue, the one or manyness, that is. But somehow they both walk away better for having just been engaged in the process, and so too everybody else. The young boy that was going to go to Protagoras and pay him a fee has not been harmed because he took the appearance of Protagoras as a teacher of virtue to be an actual teacher of virtue. Through this process of not learning about virtue, he sort of learned about virtue.
Yeah.
Um, and in that way it's beneficial, but it's difficult to say that that's the value, you know.
Two things. For you and your watch back, every now and then your hat like aspect shifts and it looks like your hair. So then it looks like you got like orange hair.
Not too
It's
young to believe.
brilliant. The the um the mountain peak image, the image that's I keep preferring, and that like you said like higher energy, this thing of, and it's this non-position of virtue or virtuosity that I also keep preferring, the betweenness. It's like it's 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 like something takes hold between us and it draws us by its own intelligibility towards and through itself. And it's that like that living element, like that live thing.
Yeah, that
That's
being.
that's what that's what all the contextualization and the constraints seem to be about. And like the fire analogy is good because like you can set the logs and then try, and like sometimes the wood's a bit wet and then but when it takes and then it like has this life of its own. The I was thinking that like um I want to have some kind of hard position on the only viable theory is theory that is arrived at in that manner, because it's arising out of a um it it's arising between us.
But then would you say that theory can't arise alone? Like, can you not set the logs yourself and watch it catch flame? Like perhaps being with others is more conducive to that, but there's definitely a sense in which like,
Yeah.
I think you don't want to restrict your research to just saying that, that's that theory only arises in a
I
social
mean,
or something.
I came to that proposal when I was by myself. So it's like but I just enjoy it. I enjoy the emphasis, like and even Socrates in this dialogue is like, he's just like, it's just better for us to do it together. We have more eyes. Like we can see the thing. We
Oh
can see the
yeah, I
thing
mean,
better.
just in terms of that, dude. Again, when I told you I read the dialogue for the second time today, and I saw it
Mm,
in a completely different light. Just us talking about it, I that gold analogy that I picked up on so radically, and that led to all the fruits. I think for me was
yeah.
something. It was like a throwaway. Like I was just like, cool. I guess it's not like a face. And then I continued reading the text, and without Seapo getting stuck on that one point, or without us being stuck on the one in many relationship, I would have never gone, wonder what this is
Yeah.
about. There's so many things. I mean, you really attended to sort of the way that I approach a philosophical text. I have a book like somewhere on my bed where there's like the arguments of the text. And like I was like writing down like the one in many argument, and like like literally like line per line, premise, conclusion, sort of like the difference is this and this is that, and like definitional stuff. And it was like hard body. What is the argument? What are the arguments being put forward? And then you just shifted it towards the sort of performativity of the text. And then there was an argument in the sort of performativity all along that like I would
Yeah.
never have seen had it not been for this discussion. And I mean the performative argument's way more interesting than the arguments of the text. Like we like I didn't read my frustration at the Protagoras that I expressed to you at the beginning was, oh, they didn't really tell us what virtue was at the end of the text. So like, they didn't really do anything. Like they just sort of like fluttered around a few arguments, put a few definitions, ran around on some weird tangents and stories, told Protagoras to shut up because he was talking too much. Like it felt like it felt like it was a good text. And when I read it for the first time, I was like, this is a good text. But only now can I retrospectively see why it's good. And the reason why it's good is because of all this performative stuff happening. It's the
Mm,
drama
mm,
of the text that
yeah.
really is itself an argument and a testament to the richness of the Platonic text. That
Yeah.
it wouldn't that like is enabled by a different set of eyes, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. And that performativity as being like as pointing to the thing that um like what started our dialogue, the being of virtue, or like the character of virtue, like the one performing in a way, like the performer. The
Yeah, we got quite close to it as well, I think. Like I mean, I was convinced for like a whole before I considered death, like a whole like 20 minutes. I just went on about Socrates being virtue. Like a madman. And I think there's something with that. I think that perhaps even though it's wrong, just entertaining that to see where it led
yeah,
was
yeah,
um
yeah,
so yeah, I mean it was a much just I think perhaps your proposal that like research only happens in a social context or whatever you want to say is not so
mhm,
much that the only true research is research that is socially conducted or whatever, but rather that like I think maybe why you're feeling this way is because in academia there's this tendency to isolate thinkers. Like when I did my dissertation on Kant or whatever, the master's thesis, there was this like, I'm writing alone. I need to read this text by myself, and I go see Larry on the
yeah,
occasion. And there's this tendency in academia to isolate thinkers rather than like to bring them together. You need to write your own masters and stuff like that, or your own PhD paper. Like, what's the
yeah,
when that's not really learning. Like true learning only
yeah.
happens in this sort of a setting.
There's the the that like you're making the proposal that Socrates is virtue, like that's come to be one of the constraints that facilitates dialogue, that we've kind of in like a three-part process kind of arrived at. And it's like because something has to be offered, like something has to be not as like the final statement on anything, but like something offered, and then it can be worked with, it can be like burnt. And so there's like even that language of like of offering, and then we can apply ourselves to the manner of tending toward or attending to what is offered. And then the third, so those are the first, the proposals, it's better for them to be about virtue than the skill of attending to proposals. And then the third one is reflecting on how what it is that is being proposed and spoken about is presencing in some way in the conversation. So the exciting part about that is that it then becomes like it then becomes research in terms of you find stuff. Like we found that the aspect of virtue that was reiterating itself and insisting that we attend to it was appropriate opposition. So like it arose in the context of being after virtue, and then we've been like attending to it. So it's a finding. Like, I don't know what the relevance will be, but
we've even perhaps got an instance, or we've even perhaps got a better definition of appropriate opposition through the processes that we've been going through, and the definition that I've been coming back to here and there, and that's I mean it's letting things be what they are, but it's presenting the true as true and the false as false. Whatever that is, that's what appropriate opposition amounts to. So like when someone asks you what is appropriate opposition, you can say it's it's presenting the true as true and the false as false, or exposing false knowledge as false knowledge and true knowledge as true knowledge. So you've got like you've got a richer definition, or like an actual example of what it is, and you can, in that sense, you've got further examples. If you want to give like a visual image of what that would look like, you could point to the case of Protagoras. Socrates is instantiating appropriate opposition by letting Protagoras be what he truly is, or by removing the semblance that blocks his vision of himself from him. So you've got like a whole through line that runs from like the general definition of appropriate opposition right down to the particular instance of appropriate opposition. And it's like by having that, you'll be able to identify by having that, you'll be able to identify other instances of this, I think, and cultivating that skill of appropriate opposition. Like by getting more acquainted with the nature of what it is to be appropriately opposed, you yourself will be able to appropriately oppose better.
Yeah. Avile wants to oppose us.
Yes. Slight disagreement there. I want to say the appropriate opposition comes from doing the self-sameness thing in yourself. So when Socrates does the appropriate opposition thing against Protagoras, Socrates is aware of himself, that he knows nothing. He allows this guy to put on a show, and then goes to the show and says, but that's not a tiger. And then he must turn his attention to the fact that that is not a tiger, and he's not a ringmaster, and this is a circus, and he must turn his own soul. He must do that. Socrates only points, because Socrates is aware that he doesn't know anything. So all he can do is point. There is nothing that he is that he can stand in order to oppose. So there's no skill that he needs to cultivate apart from, I don't know anything and I must point.
Yeah.
And that's just him going after things that he's interested in. What is
But
that?
isn't that
How does that
isn't knowing that you don't know itself the skill? So like there's that difference I wanted to speak about earlier, but I held myself back. So Socrates knows that he doesn't know, right? And that's what makes him like open to these positions and closed at the correct times. Uh, that's different from not knowing. Like there's a difference between knowing that you don't know and not knowing. Not knowing is just ignorance. Socrates has like a sort of awareness of ignorance. And that awareness of ignorance is, in a sense, a sort of appropriate opposition. It's knowing that he doesn't know. So he has knowledge of the contents that he doesn't know. Not necessarily the particular contents, like not necessarily that he doesn't know what virtue is or that he doesn't know, I don't know, the laws of physics, some random thing. But in that knowledge, there's a sort of particularity to it that makes it have this peculiar open and closeness that it has. And what I'm trying to say is that like through becoming aware of our own ignorance, through knowing that we don't know, through that process of ourself coming to know that we don't know, we get a better ability to grasp that we don't know. And so to uh, conduct ourselves better with other people and in a way that's beneficial to them. So too, as in the dialogue, for the example, is Protagoras comes to know that he doesn't know that virtue is what virtue is, whether virtue is one or many, or the way it's one or many. And so again, I don't really know the ending of the dialogue, but it seems like they end amicably and they say that the next time they run into each other, they'll talk to each other about virtue again. And so it's unclear whether Protagoras continues to teach or to claim to teach virtue and continues to peddle these portions of the soul that he doesn't really know, like the whole weird wholesale grocer. But one can imagine, I'm just imagining an ending to the dialogue where Protagoras goes off and stops teaching or is more hesitant in his teaching. And in doing so, he knows that he doesn't know and somehow comes to be more appropriately disposed to the world and to be more fully the type of thing that he is, an inquirer. Like what's weird is Socrates praises, I don't want to get into this because I'm going to fall asleep at this chair, is that Protagoras, Socrates praises Protagoras as beautiful, like more beautiful than, I think it was Alcibiades or something. I can't remember what the example was. And he says that he's beautiful, more beautiful than him because he's got superlative wisdom or whatever it is. He's like extremely wise. And the whole conversation kind of points to Protagoras not being wise. Like he doesn't know what virtue is. He claims to be something that he isn't. He goes on these long rants. He doesn't know how to answer short questions. He says that he can answer questions shortly and in long form, but actually can't. At every instance, he seems unwise. But why does Socrates say that he spent this time with one of the most wise men if you think he's wise? Like, what's the wisdom then that Protagoras has? And perhaps in my mind, the wisdom is a sort of a willingness to accept, and that willingness to accept that he doesn't know towards the end that comes up. He's recalcitrant, he's hesitant, he doesn't want to do it the whole time. It's difficult to accept that you don't know. It's terrifying and scary and hard. Like it's much easier to cling to a false opinion than it is to say, to honestly go out and say, don't know. But there's something when someone does that honestly, when it's not just a matter of them being an idiot or being like a annoying, then there's like something good about that, I think. Sorry, that was a long rant.
There's a there was something almost endearing about I use the word vulnerability, almost like the apparent vulnerability of Socrates to well, to everyone almost. Like he can seem to be taken in. And I mean the myth with Prometheus and Ephesus, whatever.
Yes,
That's a
something
pretty rad myth. Like
like
like this.
But I think that's like the same thing that's like it's emphasized in, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm virtuous or something like that, or that philosophy's made me more predisposed to being open, but it really has. Like people that I think I wouldn't have given the time of day before, I do, just because I'm aware that I don't know stuff and I'm curious about the stuff that I want to know. Like it's that like, and I'm happy to explore these things and not come to a conclusion on them. Just to see whether there is one in the first place. Like I'm happy to meet with you guys at 10:30 at night and talk about Plato and see whether we come to something about virtue, because occasionally we hit here and there and then something worthwhile comes of it. But that's 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 the result of doing this activity.
Yeah. Go 10:30.
You know, like, I'm not an undergrad anymore.
Yo. Yeah, I think so. There's been the Parmenides suggestion for the dialectic. Yeah, it's the first, the claim that comes. I think it's in one of Zizek's books, or it's in Hegel or somewhere. It's the first statement of dialectics in the Western canon.
Oh yeah. I can't remember where it comes up, but it does. And Hegel is a big fan of the Parmenides from what I've heard.
So there's there's that. There's let's give this, we've covered a lot of ground. Some of it uncertain, some of it a clear path. So, yeah. So let's let things percolate. It still feels like, because this is the sixth of the question, can virtue be taught? It feels like the seventh. It feels like seven is a good series, and then so let's let a topic percolate. If there's something that really convicts any of us, then we can kind of bring that forward as the like a. But then this general sense of like a concluding, an attempt to conclude whatever. Maybe we should just say yes. It can be so, or no.
I think seven is a good number. I haven't been here for the rest of them. My suspicion is that the conclusion itself will it's not really be satisfactory.
Yeah.
And I think that might just be part of the nature of the inquiry. So to say it's complex, um, perhaps might be
Um,
it might be appropriate in some ways, because I mean, just to throw it back again to these Platonic texts, I keep one of the peculiarities that I keep running into Plato is that I keep finding the same argument in all the different texts, and they bring me no closer to an answer. In fact, they seem to make things worse. They open up problems rather than close them and tie up loose ends. But I get a lot to say from them. Like I feel like I feel like I'm better acquainted with the thing, even though I don't have a final word on it. And
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
even though there does need to be some form of closing, I think, um, an ending that is open is not
Yeah.
necessarily a
Yeah.
bad one.
But it's to be it's to be acquainted together with the same negative space, like with the same and there's like work into that. There's like work into that negated area. Like yeah. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. Sure. It's good. I don't know what's wrong with you guys that this is something you like doing, but
Yeah, me either.
Hectic. Philosophy is an addiction. A Poirier